41 minutes. That's the number burned into the digital records of Nancy Guthrie's residence in Pima County, Arizona. 41 minutes of documented activity inside the home. And when Sheriff Nanos examined that timestamp, when he reviewed the evidence accumulating on his desk, he made a decision that few investigators would make in a missing persons case. He activated the unit specializing in the most serious criminal outcomes, not just search and rescue teams, not just the missing persons division, detectives trained to handle cases where the worst has already happened. And this decision, made before any definitive discovery, before any confirmation about Nancy's fate, already revealed what authorities were seeing behind closed doors. Nancy Guthrie lived alone in that comfortable Arizona home. A woman in her 70s, dependent on daily medication for conditions requiring constant treatment. The residence had security cameras, an alarm system, the modern protections people install believing they create safety. Her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, co-anchors NBC's Today Show, a face recognized by millions each morning. That connection would later become significant when investigators began constructing theories about motive and targeting. But on that quiet weekend morning, what mattered most wasn't fame or family connections. What mattered was what the security systems captured, and more importantly, what they failed to capture. Digital timestamps don't lie. They record with mechanical precision, indifferent to the narratives humans try to construct around them. Someone was inside Nancy Guthrie's home for 41 minutes. Not 5 minutes. Not 10. 41. Former DC Detective Ted Williams, analyzing the case publicly, stated what experienced investigators already understood. That duration tells a story. A burglar operates on adrenaline and fear, racing against time, knowing every second increases risk of discovery. You grab what you can see, what you can carry, and you disappear. But 41 minutes suggests something entirely different. Comfort with the environment, familiarity with the layout, knowledge of where cameras point and which systems might be watching, time spent doing something beyond simply taking valuables and fleeing. The medication detail troubled investigators from the start. Nancy required daily medication to manage serious health conditions. Those medications sat in the residence, accessible, visible. Yet when Nancy was removed from her home, those essential pills were left behind. Think about the logic required here. If you're demanding ransom for someone's safe return, you need that person alive long enough to collect payment. You need them stable, functional, able to prove they're still breathing when proof of life becomes necessary. Leaving behind the very medication keeping your leverage alive creates a contradiction sharp enough to cut through any ransom narrative. Either the individuals involved didn't understand the medical necessity, which seemed unlikely given the time they spent inside, or keeping Nancy Guthrie alive long-term was never part of the operational plan. Sheriff Nanos addressed this publicly, noting that multiple days had passed since the incident. The window for medical stability was closing. Medical experts could calculate with grim precision how long someone in Nancy's condition could survive without treatment, and no evidence suggested those medications had been provided. The security camera situation added another layer of complexity. The residence was equipped with cameras designed to capture activity around the property. But the cameras inside the home weren't functioning during the critical period, not broken randomly, not malfunctioning by chance, inoperable in a way that suggested either deliberate action or foreknowledge. Detective Williams noted that anyone spending 41 minutes inside would have been acutely aware of camera positions and their operational status. This knowledge comes from somewhere. Either direct experience, someone who had been inside before, who had access to the property, who understood the security infrastructure. Or it comes from information provided by someone familiar with the home, a contractor who had worked there, a service provider with regular access. Someone in the social or professional orbit who possessed detailed knowledge of security vulnerabilities. Either scenario pointed away from random chance and toward targeted, carefully orchestrated planning. Then came the ransom communications. A demand was made. Contact was attempted. But experienced investigators who handle abduction cases look for specific behavioral patterns. Communication methods follow predictable protocols. Payment demands are structured in particular ways. Proof of life follows established timelines. The Nancy Guthrie case deviated from these patterns in ways that created immediate skepticism. The exact amount demanded wasn't disclosed publicly, but the manner of communication and timing of demands raised questions about whether this was genuinely financially motivated or whether the ransom element existed to misdirect the investigation. Multiple deadlines passed. Communication became irregular, and critically, no credible proof of life was provided in any form that satisfied investigative standards. These factors converged to create serious doubt about whether investigators were dealing with a legitimate ransom situation, and that's when Sheriff Nanos made his defining decision. He brought in the Specialized Criminal Investigation Unit. Not quietly, not as a precaution kept from media view, openly and deliberately. He explained this choice in terms carefully selected but unmistakably clear. He receives briefings daily, sometimes multiple times, on various search and rescue operations across the county. Rarely does law enforcement activate specialized criminal investigators in missing persons cases. But this one, he stated publicly, came across with information concerning enough to warrant dual approach. Search and rescue teams would continue their mission, operating on hope that Nancy might still be located alive. But the criminal investigation team needed to begin their work immediately because, as Sheriff Nanos stated directly during press conferences, there is something that is not right here. That statement, delivered publicly by the county's top law enforcement official, sent an unambiguous message. Investigators weren't treating this as standard protocol. They were treating it as a criminal matter potentially involving the gravest outcomes. The evidence they were reviewing, the inconsistencies in the timeline, the behavior patterns of whoever was involved, all pointed toward the possibility that Nancy might not be found alive, and more significantly, that her disappearance might not be what initial appearances suggested. Theories began crystallizing around several possibilities, each supported by different evidentiary elements. The first theory held this was indeed a ransom situation that spiraled beyond control. Someone targeted Nancy for financial gain, underestimated the complexity of executing a successful abduction, made critical errors in the ransom process, and when complications emerged, the situation escalated in ways that transformed this into a criminal investigation of the most serious nature. This theory explained the ransom notes and initial communications, but struggled to account for why essential medications were abandoned and why the ransom process became so chaotic. A second theory suggested this was never genuinely about ransom at all. The abduction was staged to misdirect investigation. What happened to Nancy occurred for personal reasons, financial motives unrelated to ransom collection, or as part of a targeted action motivated by resentment or psychological factors. The ransom element was theatrical, designed to create the appearance of random crime when the reality was planned and deeply personal. This theory better explained the insider knowledge, the precise timing, and the fundamental inconsistencies in how the ransom process unfolded. A third theory, less developed but still under consideration, involved the possibility that someone close to Nancy, whether immediate family or close associate, was involved either directly or through hiring others. This would account for the insider knowledge, while potentially explaining staging elements designed to deflect suspicion away from those with closest connections. Investigators began focusing on specific questions that could narrow the suspect pool. Who possessed the detailed knowledge required to disable or circumvent cameras? Who understood Nancy's daily routines and medical vulnerabilities? Who comprehended the security systems well enough to operate inside the residence for 41 minutes without triggering responses? These questions pointed toward individuals with access. Contractors who had recently worked on the property became subjects of particular interest. A neighbor, Laura Gargano, noted publicly that Nancy's roof appeared unusually clean compared to other homes in the area, which had accumulated dirt from recent rainfall. She specifically suggested to investigators that they examine contractors who had performed work before the disappearance. Day workers spend substantial time at properties. They observe interior layouts, notice routines, identify security measures, develop familiarity with residents and their patterns. They fit the behavioral profile of someone who could plan and execute an operation with this level of precision. But contractors weren't the only focus. Investigators examined delivery drivers, service providers, anyone with regular or recent property access. The web of potential suspects expanded to include anyone who might have possessed the necessary information to plan this operation. The timing added another compelling dimension. Nancy was taken precisely as Savannah Guthrie was scheduled to leave the country to cover the Winter Olympics for NBC. That timing seemed too precise for coincidence. Someone who knew about Savannah's travel schedule would also likely know that Nancy might be alone, that immediate family response might be delayed, that a specific window of opportunity existed. This suggested insider knowledge, not necessarily from immediate family, but from someone in the circle of people with access to information about schedules, travel plans, and household routines. The decision to involve specialized criminal investigators early fundamentally altered the investigation's trajectory. Resources were allocated differently. Evidence was processed with enhanced priorities. Interviews followed advanced protocols. Searches focused not merely on rescue, but on comprehensive evidence recovery. The investigative framework shifted from hoping for safe return to determining what occurred and identifying who bore responsibility. Investigators worked methodically through each theory, testing them against available evidence. They interviewed contractors and service providers. They reviewed financial records, searching for unusual transactions or money-related motives. They examined Nancy's personal relationships, social connections, any conflicts or tensions that might have generated motive. They analyzed communication patterns, travel records, digital footprints of everyone in Nancy's orbit, and they continued searching both for Nancy herself and for any physical evidence that might break the case open. The work proved painstaking and often frustrating. Leads that appeared promising reached dead ends. Evidence that seemed significant proved ambiguous upon closer examination. As the case continued without resolution, investigators faced mounting public pressure to provide answers. The sheriff's department held press conferences when significant developments occurred, but briefing frequency decreased as the investigation moved into more sensitive phases, requiring confidentiality. The public statement that no suspects or persons of interest had been formally identified remained accurate from legal and investigative standpoints. But this didn't mean investigators lacked theories or areas of focus. It meant no one had been identified with sufficient evidence to justify that public designation. This represents a critical distinction in law enforcement communication. Naming someone as a person of interest or suspect carries substantial legal and ethical weight. It affects rights, reputation, and the investigation itself. Law enforcement requires substantial evidentiary basis before taking that step. The absence of public identification doesn't equal absence of investigative attention. The family's response added profound emotional dimension to a case already generating national attention. Savannah Guthrie and her siblings released video statements pleading for their mother's return. The anguish was visible, undeniably genuine. Savannah spoke about nightmares, about her mind feeling haunted by what might be happening to her mother. The family's pain existed as real and valid, regardless of whatever investigative theories were being pursued behind the scenes. The emotional reality for the family existed on a different plane from the investigative reality. They wanted their mother back. Investigators wanted to determine what happened and hold someone accountable. Both goals carried importance, but they required different approaches and led to different actions. The case remains open and active. Investigators continue following leads, processing evidence, building their understanding of what occurred and who might bear responsibility. The decision to involve specialized criminal investigators early ensured that evidence was preserved and processed according to standards required for eventual prosecution. Search efforts continue in targeted areas based on investigative theories and analytical assessment. And Sheriff Nanos maintains his commitment to providing updates when significant developments occur, while protecting details requiring confidentiality for investigative integrity. The investigation into what happened to Nancy Guthrie represents law enforcement working methodically through a complex case where initial appearances failed to match underlying evidence. Where a ransom note existed, but behavioral patterns suggested something far more complicated. Where 41 minutes inside a residence told a story that contradicted the narrative of random abduction. And where the decision to activate specialized criminal investigation teams reflected professional judgment that whatever this case represented, it demanded investigation with the most comprehensive resources available. That judgment shaped everything that followed and positioned investigators to pursue justice for Nancy Guthrie, however long that pursuit might require, and wherever the evidence might ultimately lead. The 41 minutes remain central to understanding what transpired. The medications left behind continue raising questions about intent and planning. And the decision by Sheriff Nanos to involve his most experienced criminal investigators from the investigation's inception proved to be the foundation upon which the entire case was built, ensuring that when answers eventually emerge, they will be supported by evidence collected and analyzed according to the highest investigative standards that justice demands.